So then the question becomes, okay, well, if you are someone who experienced testosterone-driven puberty and you are a transgender girl or woman and you want to participate in girls and women's sports, and we know that there are physiological and metabolic advantages conferred upon those who go through testosterone-driven puberty, how successful is testosterone suppression?
Yes.
And that is an open question that's being studied, right? And so what we know is that testosterone suppression does affect muscle mass. It does not reduce muscle mass down to a typical cisgender female level. We know that there are some metabolic indicators that are affected, but again, not down to what we would expect to see in a typical cisgender woman. But what we also know is they are not the same physiologically as what we would expect to see in cisgender men.
It's not a magic Command-Z undo button.
No, it doesn't undo it in terms of testosterone-driven puberty. You know, if you are somebody who is tall, it doesn't necessarily shrink you down to the height you might have been had you not gone through testosterone-driven puberty. But I thought it was interesting in one of my interviews with Leah Thomas, she said she did shrink an inch, that her feet shrank.
But so this speaks to the part of the function of a population that is tiny and is constantly under legal attack, is that there just aren't a lot of studies, it feels like.
No, there's not a lot of data specifically around transgender athletes. So a lot of what we are extrapolating in terms of the differences of sexes in athletic performance is from studies of elite cisgender men and cisgender women. And then we do have some studies that look at the effects of testosterone suppression on certain athletic outputs. So for example, there's a study that looks at members of the military in various stages of transition, both transgender women and transgender men, and how various cross-hormone therapy and, in the case of transgender women, testosterone suppression affects their push-ups, sit-ups, and mile time. And for transgender women, their push-ups, they come down to a level that's reflected in cisgender women. Same thing with the sit-ups. The mile time does not, but the study was kind of cut short. And so with longer time on suppression that may have happened, it also may not have happened. There's a study out of Brazil that looks at testosterone suppression with some folks having suppressed their testosterone up to like 14 years, which is actually one of the longest times that we have from a data set perspective on VO2 max, grip strength, and a couple of other physiological indicators. And it's mixed, right? Like in terms of how testosterone suppression affects your VO2 max and your grip strength and what remains, what does not remain. Like we don't have longitudinal data on transgender athletes and, starting testosterone suppression at various levels of puberty and how that affects athletic performance.
But look, I want to essentially try and do a brief summary then of the nuance you just laid out, which is to say that there are many drivers of athletic performance, right? And that goes to skill and size and speed and all that stuff. Money, all that is in this multivariate equation. Let's say that testosterone, that puberty in that way, is not the entire story, but it is a relevant influence upon one's athletic performance. What do we do with that?
It is my perspective that when it comes to placing restriction on the eligibility for transgender girls and women in the women's category, when we should begin to care about that is when there are real stakes involved. And what I mean by that is scholarships and money. So Division I, Division II, college. There can be restrictions. And it's worth noting that there have been restrictions. Right?
Yes.
Like there was a very clear policy that the NCAA was using beginning in 2011 that required transgender women to suppress their testosterone for 1 year before being eligible to compete in the women's category. It is worth noting that for the most famous example of a transgender woman competing on a Division I level successfully, Leah Thomas, she suppressed her testosterone for over 2 years.
Right.
And so it's also worth noting that a transgender woman being able to compete in the women's category and be allowed to win, for some people, that is seen as a failure of policy, that the policy should be designed to make sure it doesn't happen. And so for me, as I write in Fair Play, when it comes to Division I, Division II, some restriction, okay.
Yes.
Professional, some restriction, okay. Same thing with the Olympic level. Those are places where we already have an elevated level of scrutiny for those athletes, whether or not you may believe that that is appropriate. It does exist in terms of testing for doping, in terms of various eligibility. There's also such a high bar to clear because, again, sports are skills. You have to be good enough to be able to compete. And so there are already barriers to entry in that way.
Barriers, by the way, that have existed for over a decade in the NCAA's case, as you referred to, that I think it would almost be surprising to learn that if all you learned about this topic came through the political news cycle.
Yeah, I think it definitely people think that that there are just no policies.
Correct. That if you
there have been no
include that there
guardrails.
is no way of creating a policy at all, it is, again, quite binary. It's yes or no. And in fact, there have been real world, politically successful policies when it comes to how to regulate, the elite levels of sports.
Mm-hmm. And the Olympics also has had a policy.
Yes. The point being, if you're going to draw a line somewhere in terms of where do we regulate testosterone, where do we make people jump through hoops from a policy perspective to be included, to get access to sports, you're saying D1, D2, elite sports, Olympics. That's the cutoff.
Yeah, for me it is. So what that means then in practice is
Yes.
K through 12, you should be able to participate in school sports wherever feels good for you. Club level sports at that age as well, right? Because, you can play travel soccer outside of your school system. Similarly, in terms of being able to participate and compete in a way that works best for you. When we're looking at club sports at the college level, which is essentially pay to play, same thing. Intramural level sports, you should be able to play wherever it is that you want to play. Adult recreational community sports, play where you want. So we should be allowed to participate in sports in a way that is communal and fun. And at those levels, even though, yes, I understand that at high school, it does get a little bit messier. For me, when I say messy, I mean in terms of, I don't want to cheapen anybody's experience in terms of saying your championship doesn't matter. Of course it matters. I played for a sectional championship. I still think about it. I'm still bitter about the loss. It was a
there's the humble brag. I was waiting for it.
Defining moment in my high school career.
Yes, and you mean that it's in the book. I mean, I mean it seriously. Yes, this is real to you.
Yes, as it is to so many people who played for a state championship on their football team, or who loved, running track with their friends, or who won track championships, or who swam in a final with maybe they got on the podium. I understand that for so many athletes, no matter when that experience started or finished, the competitive part of you really loved that experience, probably, hopefully. I hope it was a good one. And that was important. And so not cheapening that at all. And also, high school athletes are minors. And for me, morally and philosophically, I cannot get to a place where we are requiring medical intervention for children to compete in school sports.